I don't have any opening comments. I'm happy to take your questions.
Okay, budget's next week. I know that went through, and this might be for Representative Fogel as the budget head on the Dem side. I guess overall thoughts on this year's budget process compared to last year's. I know kind of not having a conference committee, and there was a lot of upset over the substitutes dropping kind of late. Just overall thoughts on how the process has gone.
Yeah, I think procedurally things couldn't have gone better this year, with the exception of course, the problems with movers, which were unavoidable for all of us. I want to commend the chair for working so well with the minority party. Communication has been very positive. We have put our heads down and sat in that budget room for hundreds of hours, which I really appreciate, and have reverted to the old way of going through the budget line by line, which I know is quite time consuming, but I think the right thing to do when we're talking about a $50 billion budget. We've been able, as Democrats, to get some wins through the process, and look forward to the process continuing next week.
Yeah, this is normally kind of the best chance for Democrats to get a lot of priorities, and especially on the House side. How do you feel like the budget's gone this year, especially in a year where it's going to be probably a smaller budget compared to years past?
Absolutely. So I think, as always, the governor's recommendations are to make more investments than we choose to do in the House. It's pretty typical that when the budget comes over to us, we reduce the recommended funding from the governor's version, and then it'll pass over to the Senate, where Senator Huff and his team will probably choose to make more investments. I think for us as Democrats, we're really proud of the priorities and the projects we've been able to get funded, and look forward to not only working in the House and trying to get things done on the House floor, but working alongside our Senate counterparts on some of those bigger picture things that there's clearly no appetite in the House for, things like fully funding the foundation formula, restoring the federal dollars for child care assistance for families back home, and hopefully removing the voucher, $50 million in voucher spend that I think all Democrats stand united in opposition.
Do you think $50 million is what do you think of the $50 million price tag for the World Cup? Is that too much, not enough, good dollar amount? How do you feel about that?
I'll be honest with you, that is a conversation that I'm not necessarily at the table for outside of the budget room. I know Rep. Ani and the Kansas City delegation have been a lot more involved in the day-to-day, and the role I play in that is just to see what's in front of me and to figure out if I think that that's a fiscally responsible thing to do or not.
What do you feel?
We'll have to see what the final version of that looks like. Again, I'll yield to my Kansas City colleagues on what they think is best for their community and for the impact across the state.
What do you feel is like kind of the biggest frustration as far as funding wise compared to, I know prospects are smaller, so it's not like you're going to have federal dollars to pull from as much, but there's still a lot in GR. So kind of where do you feel kind of like, well, I guess that's the next question, yeah.
Yeah, so we knew walking into this budget year that it was going to be different. I've been up here, this is now my 5th year crafting or playing a small role in crafting a very large budget, and I've had the pleasure of serving under a federal administration that saw fit to make investments in our state, and we had a lot of federal dollars that were flowing through. That's not necessarily the case. You guys see the GR numbers of those continue to decline. We're going to continue to have tough conversations about what services to fund. I think for me, the most frustrating thing in the budget process as far as that we're not fully funding the foundation formula. You're going to hear me talk about that every chance I have. I think fully funding public education is one of the most important things we do in this body, and will leave lasting legacy for all children back home.
My understanding is that the House's version of the budget is about $5.8 billion less than the governor's. How do you feel about that in terms of being such a wide gap?
Yeah, I think when we look at the differences between the governor's version of the budget and what the House is proposing, to me, one of the most significant things is the child care funding. Those are all federal dollars that we were really excited. The governor stood a few feet below us and made a proclamation during the State of the State that starting in 2026, child care providers could expect 2 things: 1, to be paid on enrollment, not attendance, and 2, to be paid at the beginning of the month and not the end. We sat in that budget room again for countless hours talking about the lack of efficiency and child care subsidy payments going out the door. I've talked about this publicly. I've had child care facilities in my district close. I've had foster families have to put their children back in foster care because they lost their subsidy spot and couldn't afford to take off work. If this was one small step that we could take to support working families back home, I would like to see us do it. And to me, that's the most striking difference between the governor's version of the budget and what we're going to pass out of the House.
This could go to you or to any representative. How do you reconcile like this smaller budget and less revenue with all of the proposed tax cuts that have gone over to the Senate?
Happy to, yeah. We passed out a $1.2 billion tax cut that primarily impacts the capital gains and the corporate income tax or the corporate tax that would be effective immediately. All of the tax cuts that would help my working families back home, where the average income is about $35,000 to $38,000, would take about a decade to set in. So I think for me, when we're balancing those two things, it's important that we're talking about what tax cuts, who are they going to impact, when are they going to impact people in light of what the budget is going to look like in the next few years. I think this year things are relatively stable, but in years to come, I think we're going to start making very difficult decisions in the budget process about what vital services to fund.
I haven't followed the budget blow by blow, so can you just elaborate on the biggest difference in the child care subsidies between the governor and the House version?
Absolutely. So, yeah, Chairman Deaton chose to strip all the federal funding that would have allowed us to pay on attendance and not, or on enrollment, not attendance. Okay. Yep. Yep.
Okay. Speaker Patterson said that he intends to have the legislation related, the proposed amendment on abortion, head to a vote in committee on Monday, with it probably not for next week, but maybe in the future. He said there will be changes to it. Have you caught wind of what any of those changes might be, or kind of position of that this is moving forward after spring break? So, you know, it could have been done earlier, but we're at this point where we're halfway through session.
I have not been part of the conversations about what changes are coming. I look forward to seeing them, of course, but what I'll say is it seems to me that the reason this has been slow rolled is that there simply is not consensus on the other side of the aisle on what language to end up with, how far to go or not, what they think that they can get passed by the voters or not. And I think that that is likely causing a lot of contention in their caucus right now. And I'm not mad about that.
Before spring break, there was a letter that was circulating calling for a meeting of House Democrats. Did that meeting happen, and what was the result of that meeting?
That meeting happened, and the result is that our caucus is stronger than ever, and we're here before you today, and we're ready to work for the people.
Passed today, this is really from our other reporter who's writing about it right as we speak, the SAPA bill. What's different about it compared to a couple years ago? Are there differences, considering it was struck down by courts? Kind of thoughts on that bill in general, and like, is it just the same bill again?
So I'll start, and then I'll pass it off to Representative Tyson Smith. You know, the one of the frustrations that we had with this piece of legislation is that we don't feel that the courts have had the final word, and the idea that we would be taking it up now before the courts have finalized the last version, their ruling on the last version of this bill, of this flawed bill, I should say, that absolutely intends on defunding our police and giving taxpayer dollars to federal criminals. That is what this bill does. And so to me, you know, the differences between the two are really just a matter of kind of some delineations between, you know, the language that was passed the first time. And again, I'll let Representative Tyson Smith speak to that. But the fact of the matter is that this is an unnecessary piece of legislation that our law enforcement does not support, and it will take money out of the hands of taxpayers and law enforcement and give it to federal criminals.
So
He's also commenting on my question.
Oh, my bad. Go ahead.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on what Ashley Honey said, the changes are minor. I think they're anticipating some language changes by the courts, and they're trying to get ahead of it for the next time. But the problem with that is we don't even know if that's going to work. So they're making small changes here, thinking the courts are going to rule one way or another. But the problem is we don't even know because it still isn't settled. So basically, like I mentioned on the floor, it's like a straw. Now you've got two pieces of cotton coming down the middle of a straw, and it's just going to complicate things for everybody. So they should have waited for the first one to be finalized before they started tinkering with the second one.
Just building on that, I mean, that lawsuit against the SAPA was filed by the Biden administration. Do you expect Trump's DOJ to continue fighting this?
I mean, who knows? I mean, I would assume so potentially, but I mean, there's no way to know, especially with the new administration. You know, the people are under so much pressure to try to figure out what to do with this. So I don't know the answer to that. I mean, we'll just have to see.
Did you foresee having an ally in Representative Lane Roberts on this?
So here's something interesting in this building. There's two types of things that are going on, right? So anytime we vote on a gun bill, if you look at the way the screens light up, it looks like all the Republicans are against any type of common sense gun reform. But that's not the conversation that's happening behind the scenes. When I walk back into the lounge, people say different things to me. I've had conversation with Roberts about gun issues before. The issue here is this, and I said this on the House floor. They're afraid, okay? There's about 5 to 10 people conservatively that are against any type of common sense gun reform, Republicans. Everyone else kind of has a position of, well, I don't want to be the only one out there. I don't want to stick my neck out. That's really the attitude behind the scenes. So, and I've heard that there may be 20 people that want to come forward from a Republican. So everyone's just afraid and they're in fear mode. And if you look, so another Republican voted no on SEPA, Representative Black. At the very end, he pushed the no button. So there's people here who know that these bills are wrong, but they're just afraid. They're afraid to come forward because of the ramifications. They're being bullied. The Firearms Coalition, they show up in committee, they take photos of representatives. Even if a representative makes a comment that's slightly not in favor of some of this legislation, they take their photo, they put them on blast. I mean, they're afraid. They're living in fears. I had a conversation with one representative last year. She was a freshman. She's not a freshman now. And she was considering a gun bill I had. And she basically pulled me to the side and said, I can't. Someone contacted her in committee and said, I'm watching you. These people are afraid. And that's what's governing a lot of this, is fear. There's no way that all those Republicans supported Hardwick's bill. They're just afraid to come out and do the right thing.
So is it mainly NRA-related bullying?
It's all of these groups, not just NRA. I mean, you've got this Firearms Coalition. There's other groups out there that are pressuring them to vote a certain way. But behind the scenes, that's not the conversation. Now, there are about 6 to 10 people that are Representative Sykes, Representative Hardwick, Mazie, Christensen. I mean, I know they're always for this type of legislation, but aside from them and a few others, most people are on the fence. They just don't want to be the only ones to step out in front.
On your amendment to ban semi-automatic and automatic sales to automatic firearm sales to teenagers, there is a law that says that that limits sales to, that bans sales for minors if they don't have parent permission or if they don't have parent permission. Is that not?
No. An 18 or a 19-year-old can buy an AR-15 or an AK-47 at the store. The shooting in St. Louis, someone that was 18 or 19 did that. The Uvalde, Texas shooting was an 18 or 19. So they don't need parent permission to buy an AR-15 or AK-47. Now, they have to be 21 to buy a handgun. But in Missouri, you can walk in and buy an AR-15 if you're 18 or 19.
So I realized we weren't able to ask you guys about this before spring break, but Proposition A, the legislation that pretty much repeals the entirety of the sick leave portion, also removes the inflation for it to go up in the future, passed the House. It actually was kind of fast-tracked and passed Senate committee this week. It was heard and then voted on immediately. Thoughts on, I guess, the passage of it and the fact that it's already pretty much on its way to the Senate floor?
Well, I think that the most disappointing piece of that is the Republican conference's consistent insistence on defying the will of the voters in this state. Whether it's on abortion or paid sick leave and minimum wage, the first order of business this year has been to undo what Missourians went to the ballot box to vote for. That is so disappointing, and that is certainly not why I ran for office, and it's not why my constituents sent me here. And to see the majority party, the supermajority party, just running roughshod over the voters of this state, it is disappointing, and it's certainly not what most folks expect from their elected officials.
Do you think there would be more support, at least on your side of the aisle, if it waited a few years to see if there was a negative impact of some sort instead of coming back immediately and trying to overturn this sort of stuff?
I won't speak to whether or not we'd be willing to compromise on that, but I will say that it would be a more common sense approach to fix a problem once it exists and not before it exists.
Speaking of what people voted on, this week, Governor Kehoe signed legislation that places the St. Louis Police Department under the gubernatorial board. I know Representative Anderson, you were hoping that that would die in the Senate, but one of the changes made does require the appointees to get Senate approval. I guess kind of thoughts on the signing of the bill, and that there is now more legislative input on who makes up the board rather than just a gubernatorial appointment.
I will start off and then I will hand it to my ranking member. It is law now, so I think that's a better procedure to make it better, but I'm still against the bill, but it's law now, so we have to work together, make the transition smooth, and do what's best for St. Louis.
Thank you, Representative Anderson. Yeah, Representative Mark Sharp, Ranking Member on Public Safety. I think the Senate confirmation process will allow some Senate Dems to have a role in that process, so that should help. But I do want to just say I haven't had a chance really to speak on the historical context of what Governor Kehoe just did. Obviously earlier this week, Governor Mike Kehoe signed the Senate substitute for House Bill 495, reinstating state control over the St. Louis Police Department. With the emergency clause attached, this takes over, and this effect goes into effect immediately. In 2012, Missouri voters overwhelmingly supported returning control of the St. Louis Police Department to locally elected officials. For 152 years before that, the department was under state control, overseen by 39 consecutive white male governors. Since regaining local control, only 3 St. Louis mayors have had the opportunity to help lead that department. Notably, under local control in the last 4 years, the city's murder case clearance rate has risen from 40% to 70%. Despite this progress, Governor Kehoe, someone who only received less than 20% of the vote in St. Louis City, someone who frequently highlights his rich ties to North St. Louis, has chosen to prioritize a bill that will remind those same St. Louis constituents and every Missouri voter who voted to support local control that he isn't afraid to embrace bills that were once endorsed by Confederate sympathizers. It has not worked in the city of Kansas City, and we have had our bloodiest years under state control. And I don't see anything groundbreaking coming from the Police Board of Commissioners in Kansas City. Considering the election that is happening in the city of St. Louis, with the recent signing of House Bill 495, I can't imagine this being easy transition, and it will certainly jeopardize the public safety further in the city of St. Louis. There was some compromise language in the bill, but it certainly doesn't help Democrats or folks in the city of St. Louis. So with that, I'll stop.
Okay, I have a wonky question from Jason Rosenbaum, my colleague, which basically says that, is there any concern about the 4th District Senator to have possible veto power over the police board members when a future lawmaker from that district could be from St. Louis County with how the district is drawn? Are there any concerns about that? I know it's really wonky, but I told him I'd ask.
I don't think it's any concerns. I think that we will work as a region. You know, there is a little tension between St. Louis City and St. Louis County, but we're going to do it in the best interest of the whole region.
There's nothing in the bill that, or in the law that forces the sponsor of the nominee to be a senator from St. Louis, right?
I'm not sure. I really couldn't hear your question. I'm sorry.
There's nothing in the bill that requires the police board nominees to be sponsored by a St. Louis state senator, is there?
It is not.
Okay. We're just assuming that that's going to happen.
I believe so.
Can I ask a question of Representative Sharp? I'm not privy to how the state board is set up for KCPD. Is that made up of local citizens and the mayor, of course?
That's correct. It's 5, including the mayor, that were appointed by the governor.
Anything else? All right. Thanks so much. Y'all have a great weekend.